At first glance, a miniature Hereford looks like a child's toy, a waist-high, plush-looking cow that seems almost too small to be real. But this little animal is not a designer novelty. It is a genetic time capsule, preserving the size and shape cattle had before we engineered them into 3,000-pound behemoths for fat and spectacle. Today, farmers across the country are making the switch back. Why would anyone trade a giant for something smaller? The answer rewrites everything you thought you knew about the history and future of American beef. In 18th century England, the real wealth in a cow was not the meat, it was the fat. It was tallow. Tallow, the rendered fat from cattle, fueled the world before electricity. Every city street and home depended on tallow candles for light, and soap makers bought it by the ton. At the London markets in the 1760s, tallow sold for 30 to 50 shillings per hundredweight, sometimes twice the price of beef. By 1810, during wartime shortages, prices soared to 80 shillings, making fat more precious than steak. This demand shaped the very bodies of cattle. Farmers bred their herds to be living reservoirs of grease, packing on as much fat as possible. A single ox could weigh 2,000 to 3,000 pounds, nearly half of that in pure tallow. The story of the Hereford breed begins here, with Benjamin Tompkins, a farmer who started his herd near Herefordshire in 1742. Tompkins chose animals that could fatten quickly on grass, and he closed his herd to outside bloodlines by 1758 to lock in those traits. Early Herefords were prized for their ability to convert pasture into dense, marbled fat. Agricultural records and herd books from the era describe these cattle as short-legged, deep-bodied, and incredibly heavy. In a world lit by candles and cleaned with tallow soap, the fatter the beast, the higher the price. For nearly a century, this single economic driver, fat for fuel, pushed farmers to breed ever larger, lard-laden cattle, setting the stage for the spectacle and competition that would soon sweep Victorian society. By the mid-1800s, the British appetite for spectacle took the obsession with fat cattle to new extremes. Prize-winning oxen, some tipping the scales at over 3,000 pounds, became the main attraction at fairs, markets, and traveling shows. Newspapers from the 1850s buzzed with stories of the great white oxen, animals so swollen with fat they could barely stand. Promoters hauled them across the country, charging curious crowds a shilling or two for a glimpse. At the Smithfield Club shows in London, the scene bordered on carnival. Posters boasted of record-breaking beasts, and the largest animals sometimes had to be hoisted upright with slings and block and tackle just to be displayed. The public marveled at their size, treating each new champion like a celebrity. Some of these giants spent their days on padded straw, unable to walk under their own weight, living monuments to a culture that equated bulk with progress and prosperity. Admission receipts from these exhibitions poured in, and breeders competed fiercely for the prestige and the profits that came with raising the fattest animal in the ring. The Victorian era turned cattle breeding into a public sport, where the measure of success was not how much beef you could eat, but how much animal you could gawk at. This was a world where the pursuit of size became its own reward, and the social status of a farmer could rise or fall on the girth of his prize ox. By the 1930s, the world around the farm was changing. Electric lights flickered on in rural kitchens, and the old market for tallow collapsed almost overnight. Suddenly, there was no premium for fat. Instead, American families, smaller than ever, living in houses with modest refrigerators, wanted something new, tender, young beef that would fit both their plates and their pantries. Meat packers and grocers responded with a marketing push for baby beef, a term that promised a more delicate steak from animals processed at just 12 to 18 months old. The ideal market weight dropped sharply, from the lumbering giants of the past to animals finishing at 800 to 1,000 pounds. A livestock historian describes this as the first true pivot in cattle breeding since the tallow era. Breeders started selecting for calves that matured quickly, laid down muscle early, and could be sent to market before reaching their second birthday. The focus shifted from sheer size to efficiency. How much high-quality beef could be produced with the least feed in the shortest time? Feedlots, still a new idea in the 1940s, began filling up with these compact, fast-growing Herefords. The show ring followed suit, rewarding animals that were blocky and deep-bodied, but not oversized. This drive for smaller, earlier maturing cattle set the stage for a new kind of competition, one that would soon test the limits of genetics and reshape the breed in ways no one expected. By the early 1950s, breeders hungry for efficiency set their sights on a new ideal: cattle that were not just smaller, but as compact and blocky as possible. The goal was a beef animal that matured early, packed on muscle quickly, and fit the growing demand for baby beef. The race to shrink size, however, came with an invisible cost. In the rush to select for shorter, thicker cattle, a hidden genetic flaw crept into the breed, one that would haunt Hereford herds for years. Veterinary records from the time tell the story in stark detail. Calves were being born with short, stubby legs and oversized heads. Many struggled to stand. Some made a distinctive snorting sound with every breath, a sign of restricted airways. Autopsies revealed cartilage defects in the nose and joints. The American Hereford Association began to receive troubling reports of high calf mortality, stunted growth, and animals that simply could not thrive. The cause was traced to a single recessive gene now known as snorter dwarfism. When both parents carried the gene, the result was a calf destined for a short, difficult life. A bovine geneticist working for the association was tasked with unraveling the pattern. By 1955, after reviewing hundreds of pedigrees and conducting post-mortem exams, he identified the carriers. The findings were published in internal bulletins and distributed to breeders across the country. The association urged a careful audit of every herd book and pedigree. Animals identified as carriers were quietly removed from breeding programs. Clean bloodlines like the Real Silvers, Mill Irons, and Zotto Heirs became the new gold standard. The association's swift action contained the problem, but the episode left a deep impression. Even the best intentions in selective breeding can carry hidden risks. This episode set a new precedent for vigilance. From that point forward, breeders and geneticists kept a close watch on pedigrees, knowing that a single misstep could ripple through generations. The lessons learned from the compressed mutation would shape every decision that followed. As the search for the perfect compact Hereford continued. A snapshot from the 1950s show ring captures the Hereford at its most iconic. The ideal animal stood just 45 inches at the withers, low enough that a judge's belt buckle lined up with the animal's back. Show catalogs from the era listed champion after champion at this benchmark, each one a compact, muscular block with deep ribs and a wide stance. This was not a product of genetic accident or dwarfism, but the result of careful selection from clean, healthy bloodlines. Breeders prized animals that finished early, carried thick muscle, and looked like beef on 4 legs, efficient, manageable, and perfectly suited for the family farm. A retired exhibitor flipping through a stack of black and white photographs points to ribbons pinned on the flanks of steers whose size would surprise today's cattlemen. In one photo, a boy, barely a teenager, stands beside his Hereford, the animal's back level with his waist, both grinning for the county fair camera. These were the cattle that filled the show barns and auction rings, earning top prices for their quality and consistency. The American Hereford Association's own records confirm this standard. Mid-century champions almost always measured between 43 and 46 inches tall, weighing 700 to 900 pounds at finishing age. Breed journals from the time praise the uniformity and thriftiness of these cattle. Judges wrote about the belt buckle type as the epitome of beef efficiency, a frame that wasted nothing, matured quickly, and yielded high-quality cuts. The look was unmistakable, short-legged, wide-bodied, and deep through the heart. For a generation of breeders, this was the gold standard, and many believed the breed had reached its peak. In these quiet, sepia-tinted images, the Hereford stands as a testament to a philosophy of moderation, practicality, and balance. A living blueprint preserved in memory and for a few stubborn families in the bloodlines themselves. In the late 1960s, a new wave of cattle arrived on American soil, and with them came a shock that rippled through every Hereford barn and auction ring. Extension specialists and breed association newsletters tracked the numbers. Charolais, Simmental, and Limousin, European imports known as Continentals, were landing at ports and dispersing to ranches across the Midwest and the Great Plains. These were not the compact, blocky animals that had dominated American show rings for decades. The new arrivals stood over 5 feet at the withers, some topping 2,000 pounds at maturity, and their calves grew faster and finished leaner than anything local breeders could produce. USDA import records from 1967 to 1972 show a steady climb in Continental breed registrations. Charolais alone jumped from a handful of herds to thousands in just a few years. Sale catalogs from the era listed prices for these European cattle at 2 to 3 times those of domestic Herefords. Commercial feedlot operators took notice. The economics were impossible to ignore. A Simmental steer could reach market weight months ahead of its American rivals, and buyers were willing to pay premiums for animals that promised more beef per acre and lower feed bills per pound gained. The effect on the traditional Hereford was immediate and brutal. Auction prices for belt-buckle cattle, the 45-inch stocky steers that had been the pride of the breed, began to collapse. In 1970, breed association meetings in Kansas City and Denver were dominated by debates over crossbreeding, frame size, and whether the American Hereford could survive without radical change. Extension agents published bulletins warning breeders to adapt or be left behind. The pressure was on. Farmers faced a stark choice: raise bigger, taller cattle to compete with the exotics, or risk being priced out of the market altogether. The arrival of the Continental breeds did not just disrupt the show ring, it rewrote the rules of cattle economics and set off a scramble that would transform the Hereford breed for generations. In 1970, the American Hereford Association made a decisive move. Breeders gathered in Kansas City, surrounded by charts and registration books, and agreed on a new standard: bigger was better. The association's official minutes from that year record the adoption of height-based selection, what would soon be called the frame score system. Tall cattle, measured from hoof to withers, became the new ideal. Frame score 9, representing animals that stood over 60 inches at the shoulder, was set as the target. Anything below frame score 5 was quietly written off as obsolete. Registry officials tracked the data with a kind of clinical precision. Graphs plotted in annual reports showed the average height of registered Herefords climbing year by year. In 1970, the average was just over 48 inches. By the late 1980s, it had surged past 55 inches, with some bulls topping 66 inches at maturity. The change was not gradual, it was enforced. Breeders who clung to the old compact lines found their calves rejected by sale barns and show judges alike. Culling became the norm. If a cow or bull did not measure up to the new height doctrine, it was sent to slaughter, regardless of temperament or thriftiness. A registry official, flipping through a decade's worth of breed records, pointed to the trend line, a steep, unbroken climb. The association circulated newsletters urging members to modernize their herds, warning that small-framed cattle would be left behind in the marketplace. Breeders responded by scouring their pastures for anything short or deep-bodied, selling off entire lines that had been the pride of the breed just a generation before. In the span of 20 years, the Hereford breed doubled in average height, all in pursuit of the frame score ideal. This institutional campaign set the stage for a new set of problems, ones that would soon come home to roost on the balance sheets of grass farmers across the country. On a windswept pasture in the Midwest, a Hereford cow towers over the grass, ribs faintly visible despite a full feed trough. The scale reads 1,650 pounds, but the animal still struggles to keep weight through the winter. Feed invoices from a typical grass farm in 1995 tell the story in numbers: $1,200 for hay, $600 for grain, and another $400 for supplements. That is over $2,000 just to keep a single cow in condition until spring. The promise of bigger cattle was supposed to mean more beef per animal, but the reality for many grass farmers has been the opposite. Larger frames demand more calories than an average pasture can provide. Extension Service studies from Nebraska and Texas document that modern Herefords, bred for size, require 40 to 50% of their annual diet as purchased grain to avoid losing condition by late fall. Without that purchased grain, cows drop weight fast, sometimes slipping below breeding condition before calving season. A grass-based rancher in Oklahoma, flipping through years of feed receipts, shakes his head at the mounting costs. He remembers when a cow could graze through summer and winter on native grass alone, with little more than a salt block as supplement. Now the same land struggles to support half as many animals, and the soil beneath their heavy hooves compacts with every wet season, leaving patches of bare earth where clover once grew. The numbers do not lie. A cow weighing 1,600 pounds puts down nearly twice the hoof pressure of her grandmother, who weighed 900 pounds, increasing erosion and reducing pasture recovery. For small acreage producers, the economic math has become punishing. On 5 acres, a single giant cow eats as much as 3 mid-century Herefords, yet produces less beef per acre and requires more money to keep her healthy. For many, the dream of efficient grass-fed beef has turned into a cycle of feed bills, thin cows, and worn-out pastures. The search for a better answer is no longer just about tradition. It is about survival. In the high desert of West Texas, the Largent family opened a herd book and quietly did something most ranchers would not dare. It was 1974. While the rest of the country chased ever taller, heavier Herefords, the Largents held on to a handful of cattle whose size and shape belonged to another era. Their pastures, tucked against the Davis Mountains, became a living archive, with cows that looked more like the champions of the 1950s than the giants filling sale barns in the 1980s. Family stories recall how C.M. Largent and his children spent evenings at the kitchen table, flipping through pedigree charts and tracing bloodlines back to the real Silvers, Mill Irons, and Zotto heirs, names that meant thriftiness, early maturity, and clean genetics. They remembered warnings from the American Hereford Association about the risks of dwarfism, and they made a pact: no shortcuts, no fads, and no culling for fashion. Instead, they kept the compact, deep-bodied animals that could thrive on sparse grass in harsh winters even if buyers at the time offered less for them. For 15 years, the Largent family bred these cattle in near obscurity, recording each birth and pairing in handwritten ledgers. When neighbors asked why they had not upgraded their herd, the answer was simple. Efficiency and resilience mattered more than the latest trend. By 1989, when the first miniature Hereford registry opened, the Largent herd stood ready. Their cattle, with clean dwarf-free pedigrees and a direct link to mid-century champions, became the foundation for a new movement. The registry records, still referencing those original herd books, offered proof that these so-called miniatures were no accident. They were a deliberate preservation of a breed's best qualities, kept alive by a family's stubborn faith in what worked. A grazing specialist stands at the edge of a 5-acre pasture, clipboard in hand, running the numbers that matter most to small-acre farmers. The question is simple. What produces more beef? A single 1,600-pound cow or 3 700-pound miniature Herefords? On paper, the answer is clear. One full-size cow needs the entire 5 acres just to maintain her weight, consuming nearly 3% of her body mass each day. That is about 48 pounds of dry forage every day, just for maintenance, not counting the extra hay and grain needed through winter. 3 miniature cows, each weighing around 700 pounds, together total 2,100 pounds of live weight. Because metabolic needs scale with size, these smaller animals eat less per pound. The combined daily intake for 3 minis is roughly 60 pounds of dry matter, a number that fits comfortably within what those same 5 acres can produce, especially with managed grazing. The math goes deeper. When it comes to beef yield per acre, 3 minis can outpace the single giant. Each one finishes at about 350 pounds of beef, for a total of 1,050 pounds. Compared to the big cow's 600 to 700 pounds. That is a 30 to 50% increase in beef harvested per acre just by switching to smaller frames. Soil health factors in too. Penetrometer readings show that a 1,600-pound cow presses nearly twice as hard on wet ground as a 700-pound animal. 3 minis spread their weight and graze evenly, cutting hoof compaction by as much as half. For the grass farmer, it is not just about how much beef you can raise. It is about how well your land recovers for the next season. The numbers and the grass both favor the little cows. A meat scientist stands at a stainless steel table, calipers in hand, measuring the cross-section of 2 ribeyes. One comes from a full-size commercial steer, the other from a miniature Hereford. The difference in scale is obvious at first glance. The standard steak stretches nearly the width of a dinner platter, while the miniature cut is closer to the size of a salad plate. As the scientist traces the marbling with a fingertip, the real story comes into focus. Surface area, not length, is what matters for a steak's eating quality. The miniature Hereford ribeye, cut from a 700-pound animal, averages 10 to 12 square inches. That is almost identical, pound for pound, to the ribeye on a 1,200-pound steer, which typically measures 15 to 18 square inches. Both cuts show the same fine webbing of intramuscular fat, the marbling that gives beef its flavor and tenderness. Marbling is what defines the eating experience. USDA grading sheets confirm that the miniature's marbling scores match those of their full-size cousins, with no penalty for compactness. Side by side, the muscle structure is nearly indistinguishable. Same grain, same color, same fat distribution. The only real difference is scale. For a family buying beef by the quarter or by the half, This means the steak on their plate delivers the same eating experience, juicy, tender, and richly flavored, just in a more practical portion. The myth that smaller cattle produce inferior beef does not hold up under the caliper. Meat scientists and butchers agree when it comes to ribeye quality. Miniature Herefords deliver the same premium eating experience as any top-tier commercial steer, proving that size is no barrier to excellence on the table. A family of 4 stands in their garage, sizing up a chest freezer. Inside, there is just enough room for a quarter beef, about 100 pounds of neatly wrapped steaks, roasts, and ground. That is the reality for most modern households. A standard 15 cubic foot freezer, already sharing space with frozen vegetables and last summer's berries. The idea of bringing home 800 pounds of beef from a full-size steer, the kind that fills half a butcher's rail, simply does not fit. There is nowhere to put it, and the $3,000 upfront price for all that meat is out of reach for most families. Miniature Herefords change the math. A whole mini, processed, yields around 200 to 300 pounds of beef, just the right size to fill a family's freezer without crowding out everything else. For many buyers, the appeal is as practical as it is economic. No need to split a steer with neighbors, no scramble to find storage, no sticker shock at pickup. The smaller carcass means a more manageable investment, often $800 to $1,200 for a quarter or half, paid directly to the farmer or butcher. The cuts are familiar: ribeyes, sirloins, briskets, just sized for the average kitchen and grill. Direct sales from the farm have become the norm for these minis. Farmers who once struggled to find buyers for bulk beef now see steady demand from families who want local meat, but only as much as they can use. The quarter beef package slides easily into a standard freezer, and the smaller upfront cost fits family budgets. For the farmer, this means cash flow arrives sooner and more reliably. For the customer, it means beef that is fresher, traceable, and right-sized for their lives. The economics of the miniature Hereford fit not just the pasture, but also the pantry and the pocketbook. On a quiet stretch of 5 acres, a young family walks among a herd of miniature Herefords. The children, still in rubber boots, reach out to scratch the broad foreheads of cows that barely come to their waists. For many new or aging farmers, the idea of handling livestock used to mean wrestling with 1,000-pound giants, animals that can and sometimes do cause serious injury. Hospital records from agricultural states show that full-size cattle are among the leading causes of farm injuries, with bulls tipping the scales at 2,000 pounds or more and responsible for the most severe accidents. Even seasoned ranchers approach a standard bull with caution. The story changes with miniature Herefords. A mature mini bull weighs around 900 pounds, less than half the size of his commercial cousins. Temperament scores gathered by breed associations and extension agents consistently rate these cattle as docile and easy to manage. On hobby farms, seniors and children alike can safely halter, groom, and even lead these animals without the fear that shadows larger breeds. Fewer injuries are reported, and daily chores become approachable, not daunting. For families starting out, or for those returning to the land after retirement, this manageable size opens the door to a kind of farming that feels welcoming, not overwhelming. The miniatures offer a sense of confidence and connection, a chance for everyone in the family to be part of the daily work without the worry that comes with bigger, more unpredictable cattle. In many states, a handful of miniature cattle can unlock property tax savings once reserved for sprawling ranches. The rules are written in the fine print of state tax codes and county assessor guidelines, but the outcome is straightforward. When land is used for bona fide agricultural purposes, like grazing livestock, It qualifies for a special valuation that slashes the tax bill. Texas leads the way, with statutes allowing 3-acre parcels to count as agricultural if they support a small herd of livestock. Miniature Herefords, with their efficient grazing and manageable size, fit this requirement perfectly. County assessor policy manuals in Travis County and Williamson County confirm that 3 to 5 acres stocked with 2 to 4 miniature Herefords meet the intensity standards for agricultural use. The impact is dramatic. In Jeff Davis County, a 4-acre property running 6 miniature Herefords saw its annual tax bill drop from $15,000 to $1,200 after approval for agricultural valuation, a savings of $13,800. Bastrop County records show a 3.2-acre hobby farm with 4 miniature Herefords cut taxes by over $4,000 in a single year. Similar numbers appear in Florida and Virginia, where 5-acre parcels stocked with miniature Herefords qualify under state greenbelt and agricultural use laws. County assessors reviewing sales records and grazing logs treat miniature cattle as legitimate livestock for valuation purposes. The only requirement is proof of commercial intent, such as selling calves or freezer beef. For small acreage owners, this is more than a loophole. It is a financial lifeline. The numbers on the tax bill speak louder than any sales pitch, showing how miniature cattle can make even a 3-acre plot pay like a working ranch. Today, as land gets pricier and consumers demand smaller, more ethical food systems, miniature cattle quietly flip the script on what it means to farm efficiently. On just 3 acres, a family can raise real beef, restore soil, and even claim an agricultural tax break without industrial scale or heavy machinery. Sometimes, progress means remembering what was nearly lost. The future of sustainable farming might just stand waist high. Share your thoughts below.